What's up, y'all? So as y'all know, Iran has been in a very big thing in the news lately. So we'll be talking about the recent peace talks between Iran and America during the ceasefire. And that's what we'll be talking about. So let's get into it.
We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on.
So they made it very clear whether he's going to accommodate them on and not accommodate them on, which means in layman's terms, he's going to tell them what he can and can't help them with. So that's what he'll be able to talk to them about regarding the peace, regarding a peace.
And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
The U.S. delegation has now left Islamabad after unsuccessful marathon peace talks with Iran. Pakistan, though, vows it will continue to mediate between Washington and Tehran, quote, in the coming days. Iranian media reports Tehran is in no hurry to get back to the negotiating table. That's according to a source close to the Iranian delegation. And until the US agrees to what Tehran deems a reasonable deal, they say the Strait of Hormuz will effectively remain closed. Well, CNN's Nick Robertson with more.
So the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. We're going to keep that motherfucker closed.
More now from.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of crazy that they're going to keep that motherfucker closed.
Islamabad.
So this is where we just heard from the vice president. No deal on the talks with Iran over 16 hours, an absolute marathon session through the night. Here,
16 hours of peace talks? That is crazy. Just deliberation. I mean, J.D. Vance was in there. He didn't get what he wanted. He didn't get a genuine, he didn't get, like, the first off. You just first talk to him, and it just goes good. Everything goes well. You're able to get to a negotiation pretty quickly. He didn't get that. So he's going to go through the second talk, maybe even a third talk. I don't know how much time they have before it's over, before the ceasefire is over, but genuinely that's like the kind of timing we on.
in the center of Islamabad, it is dawn now. When the talks began on Saturday, it was late afternoon, and we've quite literally witnessed the sun go down and then the sun come up again. And what the vice president has said is that Iran, he doesn't believe, is giving that fundamental core agreement about its nuclear aspirations. He didn't say what happens next. He didn't talk about a specific end to the ceasefire. He didn't say if it's a return to war. But what he said the United States has done is given Iran its final and best offer. The ball, it appears, is in Iran's court to come up with answers now that it hasn't been able to through this marathon session of talks. The vice president also saying that through the night, he continually kept President Trump briefed and updated. He said that he'd come into these talks positive, but fundamentally, the vice president coming in looking, he hoped, to get a relatively quick solution. The Iranians, with a much larger delegation and a much different negotiating style, coming into these talks with perhaps the aspiration, as they have done in the past, of talking, drilling down, getting what they wanted. Fundamentally, also, the Iranians believe that they still hold cards, that they can still control the Strait of Hormuz. And to them, that is something that is leverage, real leverage, they believe, and that it could get more than they were offered here in Islamabad.
What else have you learned about these talks?
Well, Victor, the entire region is sort of on a knife edge at the moment following the failure of those talks. And the question, of course, that everybody is asking is, what does this mean? What comes next? Does this mean that the ceasefire is effectively over? Does this mean that we are going to see a resumption of fighting? That clearly a huge source of anxiety and concern here in the region. There are technically still 10 days left on the clock of this ceasefire.
Okay, so there's 10 days left on the clock of the ceasefire. So you have 10 more days until Donald Trump may drop a bomb.
And Iran's foreign minister earlier had said, you know, we never expected this to be settled in one session. The fact even that the talks happened, Victor, the highest level talks to take place between the U.S. and Iran since the revolution in 1979. The fact that they lasted 21 hours, that they were, by all accounts, serious and substantive. All of that is a sort of positive indication, and yet the fundamental chasm that exists between the two sides, the complete lack of any coherent overlap, particularly, as you mentioned, on the issue of uranium enrichment and Iran's nuclear program, and particularly, of course, on the Strait of Hormuz.
So this is Iran's proposed peace plan. They want compensation. That's like the main thing that they're looking for. They want to regulate the Strait of Hormuz passage and end attacks between Iran and proxies meaning other countries. Lifting internal sanctions, unfreezing assets. That's the main thing that America likes doing is freezing assets, especially because the U.S. is a world reserve currency, which pretty much means that it controls the way that people transfer money. And so it's, in layman's terms, it pretty much means that they froze their assets, they can't use their money. And then binding UN resolution to secure any peace deal. Okay.
That is leading to real doubts that it will be possible for the two sides to find any common ground. Of course, the whole world is now waiting and watching to see what President Trump will do when he wakes up this morning, how the U.S. will respond, and whether this
is a U.S. proposed peace plan. Holy shit. Iran committing to no nuclear weapons is one of their main standing points. Iran handing over its highly enriched uranium. Now, highly enriched uranium is the same uranium that's used for nukes, so they don't want them to be able to use any of the fucking resources that they have that can pretty much the base resources, because it's more of an engineering issue. It's not necessarily a scientific issue. Like, oh, we can't think of how to create the nuke. It's more of how do we build it? So it's like, how do we build something? And it's more of an engineering issue. And so they don't want them testing nukes. They don't want them using nukes. They don't want them having any of that shit. So reopening the Strait of Hormuz. That's one of the main things. They need that shit strained up so they can get the oil, so that the oil market can have a higher cap, so that so that the oil is cheaper. Oil has to be cheaper, but the only way that we could get oil cheaper is not by producing more oil, but by exporting more oil. And the only way that we could export more oil is by getting oil from people who have a lot of it. And unfortunately, the Strait of Hormuz has a lot of countries that have a lot of oil.
Ceasefire will continue, whether we might see another round of talks, and until we get some sense of the direction that this is moving in, you will continue to see, particularly here in the Gulf, where the Strait of Hormuz is such a crucial issue, a large degree of anxiety and concern. Although I will say, when you talk to people here, there were not high hopes for these talks. There was always a recognition going into these talks here in the Gulf that it was going to be a tall order for these two sides to agree on these very thorny and complex issues, Victor.
So let's bring in now Errol Lewis. He's the political anchor for Spectrum News and host of The Big Deal with Errol Lewis. All right, Errol, good morning to you. Let's start in the Middle East. Do you foresee that there are near-term political consequences of this inability to reach a deal in Pakistan domestically?
Good morning, Victor. There are near term, but it depends on how you define near term. We have elections, important midterm elections this year. Israel has elections for its Knesset in October. I think this is the last opportunity, the last political window to try and sort of put a bow on this and say this was a success or this was a failure. The voters in both countries will have the last word, but this is the last chance for these administrations to prove that this entire adventure was worth it, as the entire global economy, of course, is hanging in the balance.
Yeah, and we saw the economic numbers this week, the highest inflation rate, annual inflation rate for nearly 2 years in the U.S. Consumer confidence is low. Specifically on the vice president, because he was the new element here. We'd seen Kushner and Witkoff in their engagements with the Iranians before the start of the war. Is there any residual political impact for J.D. Vance specifically going in 21 hours and not coming out with a deal?
Well, you know, he's an interesting choice to lead the delegation in the first place. We know that he was a skeptic about the entire operation. And in his
Okay, so they say that he's a skeptic of the entire operation, meaning Operation. I think it's Operation Fury. Pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. I think it's Operation Fury or something like that. And then it was like, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like it wasn't a good idea to go in there either over some oil. Or to even do any of that, because it's just stupid.
political past, he had specifically warned against doing exactly what this administration has now done. So to have him alongside a number of, frankly, amateurs, people who are not diplomats, who are not trained in diplomacy, who don't have the personal and professional experience and contacts to pull off something as delicate as this kind of a ceasefire conversation, he was kind of working, it was all going to be uphill no matter what. So I personally am not that surprised that he came home empty-handed. It's going to take a little bit more work and probably some work by professional diplomats to try and get the ceasefire that the United States wants.
And I acknowledge that as I ask you this question.
All right, then. See y'all. It's gonna end the year, bye.